TJ Peterson, and welcome to The Journey is Real. We talk to real people with real passions who share a real portion of their heart. Today, I am blessed to have two guests. My two guests are Ed Hancock II and Kathryn Haueisen. Welcome to both of you.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Today, we're going to be talking about history, so we titled it The Winds of Time. We have them both on here for kind of two different reasons, but kind of the same. Ed Hancock studies genealogy. He has thousands upon thousands of relatives that he's researched. He also has a book out that his grandfather's letters from World War II. That's really fascinating to me as well. Kathryn Haueisen has a historical fiction book out regarding the Mayflower, where it's real people with kind of real situations, but the fiction part is the fact that they actually have conversations, because you can't really research that. So I'm super excited to have both of you guys here today. So welcome. We'll start with Kathy.
Okay.
Can you tell us a little bit about the book?
Well, ironically, this book exists because my mother was really into genealogy. She spent her early retirement years locked up in genealogy libraries. In those days, you had to go there in person. We didn't have the internet yet. And did the documentation to prove our connection back to the Brewster family that sailed over here on the Mayflower in 1620. So I'd always known that that was part of my family history. Yes, I'd always known that's part of my family history. But I didn't pay that much attention to it until later in life. And then one of my daughters married into a family that includes some Native American heritage. And I got all excited about that. I said, is this worth scholarship money for your children when the time comes? So she did a little poking around and tried to find out more about that. And they pretty much said, yeah, we don't want to talk about it. So that got me thinking about, well, what has life been like to be Native American on this continent? And if you do very much research, you'll find out it hasn't been all that wonderful. So when I started researching the book that has become Mayflower Chronicles, The Tale of Two Cultures, I really wanted to include the perspective of the Native Americans, which is really a risky thing to do when that is not part of your DNA. It's like, you know, how dare you presume to talk for us? Haven't you meddled enough? And I really want to be respectful, and I really want to include that perspective. So I did a lot of research. I was in museums and talked to university history professors, and read a lot of books. And I eventually was introduced to the descendants of the Native Americans who were there when this event happened. One of the big things that I discovered was that there was a treaty in the spring of 1621. The Native leaders approached the English settlers and said, well, we see that you have brought women and children and building supplies. It appears you're not here to trade, so we better sit down and talk. So they did. They spent a whole afternoon talking. They worked out a treaty, which we do have record of that. It's got about, I think, 7 or so bullet points in it. And they both honored that treaty. In fact, fun fact, you probably have never been told about Thanksgiving. You've probably heard how they had this big feast together, and they went out and got more deer and, you know, kept the food going for 3 days. But what we haven't been told is, because of the treaty, when the English were celebrating their fall harvest by shooting off their muskets and just having some fun, the natives heard that and thought, oh my gosh, maybe they're in trouble. We promised we'd help them. Let's go find out. So they showed up en masse to see if they needed help. And the startled English said, no, we're fine. We're just celebrating. We made it through the winter and we've got food. And the natives said, oh, well, we'll come and celebrate with you. And then they went off and got some things to bring back. And they did indeed have a 3-day party.
Oh,
so I wanted people to know those things because we weren't told those things in school. So that was what brought me to write the book.
Okay, so then I guess the question was kind of already answered as to where your passion came from, was kind of stemmed from realizing that you were one of the Mayflower descendants?
Yes, that certainly started it. And then the other part of the passion was, and I now have 3 of my 6 grandchildren have Native American heritage. And I wanted people to know more about the stories so that their part of the story was more fully represented.
Now, when did your book come out?
The pre-orders are available now. The book is actually supposed to be available for distribution on October 6th.
Okay, now is there paperback and ebook or just paperback?
Right now, it's going to be available in ebook and paperback, and we're working on an audio version of it.
Oh, very
But
cool.
the audio version will take a little bit longer, but the ebook and the paperback will be available for distribution starting October 6th. Pre-orders are available now.
Okay. Now, can they find the links on your site for that?
They can. We just redid my front page of my webpage to get the book up there and the links to where people could pre-order it at howwiseden.com.
Okay. So could you spell that for those who are listening, please?
It's how, like how are you? Wise, like wise people. And then, like then and there, which is a play on my last name, Haueisen. But unless you're German or you know one, you are going to trip over it the first few times you hear it. So,
and I remember having to spell it. I always had to look it up on Facebook. I'm like, how are those letters in there?
Right. Yeah. It was actually fun to be in Germany, and they would just greet us at the desk. Well, welcome, Mr. and Mrs. Haueisen. Just, like we would say Smith, but if that's not your heritage, it's a tough name. So I simplified it to How Wise Then.
Awesome. Love it. Ed, could you please tell us a little bit about your portion on this between the genealogy and the book?
Yes, but before I do that, I actually have to say that Kathy and I might actually be cousins, as in my genealogy search, I've discovered not only a connection to William Brewster, but also to John Alden and Priscilla Mullins. So
all right.
Well, very cool.
Cousins 32nd times removed or something. Yeah, great.
But, I've been doing the genealogy for right about 25 years. I'm in no way, I don't consider myself to be a professional genealogist. I haven't been trained and educated in this and that and the other, but I'm an experienced genealogist in that I know where to search. And I kind of like you were saying, I actually started in the era of when you had to go to the libraries and you had to do the microfilms and the microfiche. Yes. And, a lot of, and check the huge books that I couldn't hardly carry. But of course now in the information age, it's become a lot easier. And in about 2000, I inherited a lot of information from my great uncle, who had also been working on the genealogy. So it's literally been, for me, it's been a family affair, and it's been it's been kind of a hand-me-down thing. With my grandfather's story, the book is, like I said, it's a collection of letters that he wrote when he was in World War II. And I had no idea. He passed away in 1995. I had no idea he was even in World War II until he died. He never spoke about it. He never displayed any of his patches or his awards or anything like that. I knew nothing of his service or anything like that until he died. And so I inherited his name. I'm actually named for him. That's why I'm the second. He was the first. And so when he passed away, I inherited a suitcase that had his initials, E and H, on it, which obviously were my initials. And going through there, I found all these letters that he had written. And I mean, of course, it was about a year before I opened the suitcase. But when I discovered all these letters, I mean, just tears flowing down my face, because here it was, meeting a man that I never knew existed all those years, years.
And on a personal level too, it's a deep letter because those are letters from his heart. So that's really cool.
And I like to say that, for me, it was emotional because I got to see how the boy became the man that I eventually would know as my grandfather, So, when I compiled the letters actually sat for a while because I was working on other projects and moving and, life, as they say, happens. So it was just a couple of years ago that I actually sat down and organized them and wrote that out. And I didn't want it to be just the letters. Initially, I wanted to do it just for family, but I still didn't want it to be the letters. I wanted people to understand what was going on in the world at the time. So myself, I included a little bit of backstory of the 1930s, the tail end of the stock market crash and the different wars and conflicts that were going on in the various parts of the world that led up to World War II. And then I tell a little bit of my grandfather's story, how his father was a World War I veteran. And so I tell about how they, how my great grandparents met and led to them having 3 children together. And my grandmother was married before that. She had a son from her first marriage. So together 4 children. And then we go into the letters, and you get to see, there's nothing profound in there. He doesn't meet Rommel in the desert, during the heat of battle. He doesn't, he's not sitting over there, meeting the guy that, took a sniper shot at Hitler on a Tuesday, or nothing like that. It's just the experience. One of the first letters is him writing home to tell mom he forgot socks and underwear. And I love that letter because 99 times out of 100, that's the letters they wrote. They didn't write all these profound historical letters. It was scared boys forgetting socks and underwear. And it was just things like that, little details like that really personalized the story for me. And I, whenever I talk to other people about these things and about these stories, I tell them that, that should personalize it for you. If you're reading the letters of your grandfather or your great grandfather or your uncles or aunts, those are the stories that personalize it for you.
Well, I remember when you were compiling it, and I'm going to brag on myself, I kind of pushed you to turn it into a book and push it out to everybody else, because I'm like, this stuff is very cool. You've got to get this out.
You actually did. You and my mom were actually very integral in the book becoming a reality, because it was just, like I said, to me, they were very personal letters, but I didn't think anybody else would enjoy them. Because like I said, it's him. It's not him meeting Hitler. It's him forgetting socks and underwear.
Yeah.
But it was like every time I showed it to somebody, they were like, "This is neat. This is a common man's story. You've got to get it out there."
Yeah,
so,
I'm a history buff anyway.
Yeah.
Whenever we visit different countries and stuff, that's the one thing I look for, is anything historical, because I could eat history up. I'm one of those people who believe firmly, if you don't study history, you're doomed to repeat it.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And if somebody's already made the mistakes, why repeat them?
Right.
Just learn from your past, learn from what they did, learn from what happened. And for somebody who's looking to find that book or any of your other books, how can they find you?
Well, of course, all my books are available on Amazon, but right now my website's undergoing a major overhaul. So the best place to find information on my books right now are actually at my Facebook author page. It's facebook.com/author Edward Hancock II. That's author, AUTHOR, and then my name spelled out with the second being the Roman numeral I, II.
And Hancock is HANCOCK.
Correct.
Yeah, because I know there's sometimes they put a D in there. So
yeah, There's no D in Hancock. Everybody I know, invariably somebody's going to misspell it, but there's no D.
So I have to ask the history person in me: are you related to John Hancock?
That's a loaded question. I am related to John Hancock. However, it's not a direct relation, and it's, ironically enough, it's through my maternal line that I'm more closely related than through my paternal line.
Wow.
John Hancock himself did not have any children that survived to adulthood, so he has no descendants. And I actually had to go back through an interesting connection through a sort of a tyrant in history. If you know anything about history, Edward I of England, known as the Longshanks, he was also known as the Hammer of the Scots.
Mm-hmm.
It's through that connection that I was actually able to connect to John Hancock.
Oh, interesting.
I had to go back very far.
Kathy, did you find out anything interesting that you didn't know besides the Thanksgiving story when you were doing your history research?
Well, I haven't found it yet, but my father always used to tease my mother that we were related to horse thieves. So I suppose several generations down that took place. The big shock to me when I started doing the research was that my grandmother, the woman married to William Brewster, well, both of them, but she had to leave 3 children behind in Europe when they sailed on the Mayflower. I never realized that. I am descended from I go from William Brewster to one of the children that got left behind in Europe and then joined them a year later. So that really made me pause and think about, my gosh, these people really made a lot more sacrifices than we realized to just be here.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like they came over on a cruise ship. I mean, they can't.
No. Their living quarters measure approximately 60 by 25 feet for 102 of them, plus 2 dogs. Yeah, No, it was not luxury sailing. Yeah.
Not by a long shot. Yeah, our ancestors were beasts.
Yeah.
I have to laugh when you said that your relation was horse thieves. My family, a couple generations back, not that far back, were bootleggers.
Mine too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we found that out there. I'm like, great, we're descended from bootleggers.
Well, yeah, genealogy is a bit of a dangerous hobby because you'll unearth things that maybe weren't the way you thought they were.
Right.
We're not all pure little angels back there. But the times were also different. And that's the other thing I love researching. I was a former catastrophe adjuster. So researching that whole hurricane that hit Galveston. And the poor guy who had been trying to warn everybody, hey, this is coming, gotta get out of the way. And they were pretty much laughing at him, told him no, they said it wasn't coming. And then they got smacked. And it's like the different history things. My parents, my dad passed away 2 Julys ago. My mom is 88 and my dad was just about a year or so older than her. And they would talk about different things that happened in East Texas. There was an explosion of this factory that took out a good portion of the town in East Texas. And there's just a lot of history that gets forgotten, especially as the older generation starts to taper off because it's not in the history books.
Right.
So the book about World War II, your grandfather, and the book about Mayflower, that stuff is like super important, especially for kids to read. I know it sounds kind of counterintuitive because people are trying to, make sure the kids are safe in whatever they're reading, but, they play video games that are a lot more violent than what our history looks like.
Yeah. Somebody asked me the other day if I thought it would be appropriate to put in the school library for upper grade school, middle school age kids. And I hesitated because there's some accurate descriptions of how people were tortured for being on the wrong side of the religious fights that were going on in Europe in the 15 and 1600s. But then I thought, they see much more graphic, violent stuff than that every day on their iPhones. So, sure. Yeah.
Exactly. And I mean, and our history as a nation itself isn't all, peaches and cream. I mean, there were revolutions, there was Civil War, there was American Indian War, there was, all sorts of stuff going on. And their living conditions weren't, the best anyway.
No. Oh my gosh.
They got over here and had to start over from scratch.
Yeah.
And then, like I said, I hand it to the World War II, World War I vets because, what they faced and what they had to leave, they had to leave their entire families behind. And some of these guys were literally kids.
Right.
Yeah.
We look at our kids now that are like graduating high school, and it's like these guys were graduated, handed a diploma, then handed a gun and shipped off.
Right.
Yep.
And people don't fully understand that. So I think history classes, one of the things I went to school for, oddly enough, was secondary education history. Because my history teacher was horrible.
That was kind of my experience.
Boring, not a whole lot. And there's so much rich history in just even America alone. And I wanted, to inspire kids to, look at history. History is not boring.
Yeah, my high school history classes were boring. It was memorize a long list of dates and places and names, but we didn't get into the why, and that's the part that fascinates me. So I have filled in the gaps by reading a lot of historical fiction books, but then I've also read a lot of nonfiction history, and I listen to a lot of podcasts about history. And because once you understand what the people were going through, and the dates are just the context, it's just to put it in chronological order in history. Once you get to the people and the events and what they went through, and they forgot their socks and their underwear, that's kind of critical. It becomes really interesting.
Well, and like Ed, you said that John Hancock didn't have any children live to adulthood. That was not uncommon back then.
Right.
There were a lot of diseases, wars, lots of things that had taken kids out before their time.
Right.
Half of the people that sailed on the Mayflower did not live through the first winter.
That's true.
I mean, I looked at the was it Colorado that literally went from 80 one day to inches of snow the next day.
Yes, I just read that.
Yeah, I turned to my husband and I said, I wonder if that's something like what the Donner Party ran into.
Could be.
you know, when they were heading over in that area, is that, you know, it's an unexpected September snow. Who gets snow in September?
Well, Colorado.
Yeah.
Not normally, though. It usually comes in like in November and stuff. So, because I used to read that and think, what kind of a freak snowstorm would come in September or October, you know, that early?
Well,
Well,
that's the other
right
thing.
there.
That's the other thing about studying history is we're going through this pandemic, and it's horrible, and I can't wait for it to be declared over. But there have been pandemics throughout history.
Mhm.
We're not the first generation of people to be dealing with a pandemic, and in many ways,
Right.
we're way ahead of previous generations because we can be doing this. We can still
Was
be
it like
communicating with each other.
1912 Spanish influenza one?
And 1918 was that one. Yeah.
1918? Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, study what they did. What did they do to fix it, to help it? And they had way less when it comes to, you know, medical technology
Right.
than we do now. And it's like, instead of, you don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah.
Look at the foundations are almost all there throughout history, wherever you look.
If we're willing to learn.
Mm-hmm. And that's half the battle. Well, I hate to cut this sort of short, but we've got a few minutes left. So Ed, since Kathy went first, you have about 3 or 5 minutes. Is there anything you'd like to add?
Well, the one thing, you know, being, like I said, the genealogy person or whatever, now that we do have all the technology and everything, there anybody that's interested in it, there's no excuse why you can't at least get back to your great grandparents. Or I say that there's almost no excuse. There are certain situations where this person was secretly adopted and no one knows about it, and you know there's you know affairs, and you know there may be quote unquote reasons, but basically there's anyone that's really interested in it, go on ancestry.com. I almost guarantee you'll find back to at least your great grandparents.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it's so easy. You know, I'd be careful on what record you trust. Make sure that you verify everything, but do it and do it now, especially while we've all got time.
Use your time wisely.
Yeah.
And they can find you again where?
The best place to find me right now until I get my website back up and running is my author page, facebook.com/author Edward Hancock II.
Okay, and you do have an Amazon page, correct? In case they want just to go and dive into your books?
Yes, I do. I do have an Amazon page. I unfortunately don't know the address to it, but I mean, if you can go to search to any of my books, it'll you click on the author name, it'll take you to my Amazon page.
Which is Edward Hancock II.
Correct.
EWARD HANCOCK.
Correct.
And number 2, Roman numeral 2. So
Mhm.
I. Okay, Kathy, you have about 3 to 5 minutes left. Is there anything you'd like to add?
I would really like people to understand that both the Pilgrims, as we call them, and the Native Americans were in mutually really bad places. The natives had lost a lot of their population to a pandemic that had come through just shortly before the Mayflower showed up.
I didn't know
And
that.
the settlers were really hurting because the trip took much longer than they thought that it would. They arrived in winter instead of fall. They were really in desperate straits. But they decided to forge together with this treaty, and both parties honored it. And we have not done a very good job of honoring most of the treaties we've made since. So I talk about learning from history. I'd like to go back to that chapter and say, once upon a time, we thought cooperating and mutual respect and helping each other was the way to go. I'd like to see us consider that as the way to go forward today. And we're so conflicted right now in our society, and it just breaks my heart to see people saying all these outrageous things about people just because they disagree with them. It's like, you know, why don't we try supporting each other?
Mm-hmm. And how can they find you online again?
HowWiseThen.com.
Yep, that's HowWiseThen.com.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I am thoroughly one of those people that love to dive into other cultures and history is everywhere you look. I mean, you really cannot miss it. So thank you guys for coming on and sharing about your different histories. Kathy, you have an author page as well on Amazon, correct?
We do, yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, could you please spell your name so they can find you?
HAUEISEN.
Okay, and it's under Kathryn, correct?
Yes, mm-hmm. Kathryn, yes.
It's KATHRYN.
Mm-hmm.
So
yes.
check out our books, check out Ed's books. You will not be sorry. I know I'm going to be getting Kathy's ebook here as soon as we get off of here. And I've already got Ed's book in my possession, so I don't need to worry about that.
I'll be looking for yours, CJ. Very exciting.
Yes.
You made 2 sales today, so that's good.
There you go. Well, thank you guys for coming on today, and thank you for sharing your passions, and thank you guys for sharing your hearts and even a little bit of your histories. Really appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Awesome. And thank you guys for watching The Journey is Real, where we talk to real people with real passions who share a real portion of their hearts. I'm CJ Peterson of cjpetersonwrites.com. Until next time.